Hello and welcome to the Friday wrap-up presented by the Gokhstein News Network. I am your host, Landy, and today is October 24th, 2025. And this is a big weekend coming up in terms of closing structure for Bitcoin. And we're going to concentrate on the weekly, kind of following up with where we left off on Wednesday. And of course, that Monday, that big Monday video as well. And, we watched price pretty much play out in much the way that has been described. In fact, I would say nearly to a T. And I think it's important that we have some context that's maybe a little bit different in terms of view of the support and resistance zones of interest that I regularly show you on the daily. And that's because we are in this kind of a range, this compressive range on the weekly that we really do need to be aware of, and kind of where the important areas are to watch. In this case, this weekend, and of course going forward until we see either a break to the upside or a break to the downside, we need to know kind of where are the weeklies of importance that we have to pay attention to in terms of closes. And of course, that's going to be the area over here at the 109,360. I know we've got the 112 as part of this weekly structure right here, right? But where price has dipped down to, and the zone that price has been playing in the past 2 weeks and even the week prior, on the initial move down to 107. Well, it's very important that we understand that we're kind of playing in this weekly zone of liquidity, which encompasses all of this high side structure, right? Obviously, we're going to talk about the need on the daily to reclaim the weekly at 112, especially on daily closes, to really start pushing up and moving forward with the weekly structure here. But, it's one of those scenarios where we need to look at the high side structure that was just hit. That also encompasses this high side structure over here at 104.5 on a close to the 108.4. Well, we have the lower high close with the higher high swing up here, right? That was the warning, by the way, and we're going to get to why it's important what's going on over here right now for price action and what we need to see for the bulls and what the bears might want to see as well. But in this case, we saw the lower high close, right? We saw 104.5. 105 area for a lot of derivatives on closes for this weekly over here that put in the 108.4 high. But then we followed that up with a higher high swing. So swung this entire area and closed lower. That kind of gives us a bearish bias, right? And in this case, we saw 102.5. That happens to be where the current lower second standard deviation of the Bollinger Bands is. Why is this important? Because if we break down below there, we're looking at an expansive structure on the weekly on lower term timeframes into the next major low, right? So 102.5. Yes, there is, of course, just below there, a higher low on the weekly for the close here at 101 to that 98.255. I've talked about this quite a bit. If we start closing below the lower second and then subsequently see weekly closes below this 98.225, the bottom side of this weekly in this 101 to 98 zone right here, that's expansion while breaking a support area that's going to lead to an expansive environment for the Bollinger Band set and volatility metrics. So obviously we'd be targeting, then you work away from the high side structure to the low side structure, right? And that's where we'd start looking down to 93.5. Yes, is there areas of interest on weekly closes right around 95, 96 in the point of control of this range? Absolutely. Is there an order block over here? Yeah, absolutely. But everything on this on the way here has been hit, right? On this move down, all of this liquidity was taken, right? And since this move up, we have not had price come back down to some of these levels to take this liquidity or test this liquidity, right? And that's where we then have to entertain an area of support and resistance that's around other areas of liquidity, right around 93.5 to 89. Of course, that was a nice low side swing before the higher high, but that also was the same area that we saw a lower high come in before the nice bounce off the lower second here and then run to all new highs. And this is, of course, also confluent with Fibonacci levels of interest. And all along the way here, I mean, this swing is at a 1272. This, where was the other one? The big one. There's one at a 1.168. Hold on. Let's just pull it. Let's go to the monthly real quick and pull it. A macro FIP level. So prior cycles high to low on extensions. We're looking at the 1.168 at 88. So when looking at that weekly again, that's where that was. Yeah, that's what I was referring to. 88 to upper 88 to $89,000. Saw a swing coming around there. And then of course lower high rejection right off of that. And then right now we're balancing on that 1272. Of course, rejected that area, tried to get above it, couldn't hold it, put in a higher low on the weekly, ran it, lower high on the close. That was the warning that if this 93.5 to 89 breaks down, we were going to go lower. We did go lower. We bounced, hit that 1.168, which is 16.8%. All this is 16.8%. So the one is $69,000 plus 16.8% is $88,700, to $89,000. So major areas of interest on the way down there. Only going to occur on closes below the lower second. They'll also meet the condition of expansion below the next low at 98,225. That would be bad for the bulls. That changes the weekly market structure in a big way. That could lead to the potential of a move down to the monthly level, which is right around the that swing at 74, 420.69. Yes, I have to say it every time. Now to the upside, where Bitcoin is kind of balancing, and you'd like to see it close above that 109,360, 109 area. Why 109 even? It's essentially one of the bigger areas on the low side structure. This high side structure over here for this weekly, which is 109. Essentially, it's $109,048. Call it 109 to the 112. Well, we have the 109,360 over here, so you'd want to see it kind of closing above that swing high of this prior range here. And then of course closing above the 112, starts pushing towards the 113.5 kind of daily above here, and then we have kind of a midline. This is the last lower high close. Yes, we also have an area of interest right around the close open here at 114.2, and I left this unmarked on the chart for a reason, because I want you to look at this swing high. If we look at just the close, ignore the wick, right? The wick is down to essentially the high over here at 112. Liquidity was grabbed, right? So if we look at the close here and you look at where the high of the current weekly candle is, right? And you look at the close open of the prior candle after running the highs here, this lower high close. This was a confirmed lower high swing, lower high close. We have the 114.215. And then we have 115.3. Look where this open is. The open is at 115 essentially, right below the open here. And then what did we tag? We tagged this close open structure right here at that 114.2 area. So just wanted to kind of point that out. And this is so I have green, I have red zones down here, kind of like stoplights. And this is just another view, a little bit of an alternate view that I typically show, and we can mark this as the yellow zone. And it's something to pay attention to, and it's relevant on the weekly timeframes. I prefer my daily setup that I typically show you for dailies, as it relates to the weeklies in many cases. But this is kind of big because of the way that we see the band set up here on the weekly. And that's all I'm going to talk about really. We'll take just a short look at the daily. That's all I'm going to be talking about today, is primarily the weekly and kind of where things are going, because we just had CPI data come in. It was under what was projected, but still over. It was still an increase in the month over month for total CPI. But it was still under what the projected was. I think the Fed's got a cut, but I think it's still going to be up in the air what they actually do, because there's going to be some lagging inflation and labor statistics from BLS directly, but they have their own numbers that they can work off of. But in this case, right, get above the close here, get above this week's high. And depending on where this closes by on Sunday, is even reclaiming 114 essentially to 115 here, and then pushing up to the next big area by the upper first, right? Well, that would get Bitcoin above the basis band, which is the 20 simple moving average on the weekly here. and then starting to, push up further to set a low, especially if this ends up being the high in the next week's candle. Bulls need to start reclaiming this area, this yellow zone here. You can call it 114 to 115 essentially, and trading above there to set the low. And what would be interesting, and why I wanted to point this out earlier, we had the higher high with the lower high close, right? That was the warning. Well, the bears would have a warning here if we see a closing structure, which can really only occur on closes right now above, for this week's current candle, 116, right? That big daily area that I've been talking about a lot for a very long time, 116 to 118. Close above 116 in this current weekly sessions candle by Sunday, that would set this low. Or next week, close above this week's high. Or at least don't close any lower than the close open down here, and then subsequently close above the structure up here to set the low. Well, you'd have a lower low swing, but a higher low close. That would be a very big warning to the bears that the top side very likely going to get hit, meaning run the bands one side to the other. Well, we already ran them this way. You'd see the lower second start to move up to encompass this bottom side. And while not being hit directly, you could say it was running one side to the other, coming into a compression. And then if it starts to break out above the highs, this thing can run. And it absolutely could. I mean, it could have also just swing, 128 to 130, but it could very easily run the other side. So this is a very important setup. But I'm spending so much time on this right now, is what we're looking for is, and I need to use this as an illustration. And this is just me reiterating this for those of you that need to hear it and maybe need me to say it again and again and again. The structure that we had prior, which was an expansive structure coming into a compression, right? We saw that, Bitcoin came down, made a nice higher low, nice higher high, higher low, and then started to put in a higher high with a lower high close. That was a warning, right? Well, it's an even bigger warning when you're already in a compression, because we had room to mean revert and come back and tag supports. We're coming off of major supports here. If this weekly does close another higher low, of course, right next to a prior higher low, right? As it relates to this guy down here at 101, we've got a higher low at 108.250 on a close. This close open structure is at 108.676. If this closes this low, and this is all contingent on this closing this low higher than this guy over here, with that lower low swing in place, it's very highly likely it can run the top side. And if it runs the top side, starts closing above the all-time high and the upper second standard deviation, not only can it go from 128 to 130, but it can actually start to get expansion anywhere above the all-time high, right, on closes. And then we can start targeting deeper targets. And I think that would be a shock to many people who are very, very bearish right now. So I wanted to kind of really illustrate that. It's a different view of the charts that I've been showing you recently. I'm going to go talk about the daily for 2 minutes, and then we're going to wrap this shit up. Excuse my language, but look, I've been having a lot of fun trading this. I know it's everybody's talking about how volatile it is, but look at the range that we've been in for this amount of time. Like, realistically, we've been here since the summer, right? Since the beginning of summer, we've been in and around all of these price levels, barring the Q1 to Q2 transition that we all talked about last year, right? At least I did, and many of you talked about it with me, or at least heard me talking about it in Q3 of Q4 last year, summer into fall of last year. I talked about Q1 to Q2. Well, we're starting to prep those talks, and you're going to hear me talking a lot about Q1 to Q2 of next year, and it's going to be very contingent on what happens next week, which, by the way, coming into Friday, we'll be closing the month, right? So we got some important stuff going on. FOMC meeting, so rate decisions, and then, of course, the end of the month on Friday, right? So we're going to have the new month of November price action during next week's weekly closing candle, right? So this is going to be very important. One, before we go any further, you want to see Bitcoin closing above essentially the 109 to 109, 350 level, 360 level over here, right? and closing above last week's open. If this candle turns red, it starts to endanger our kind of thesis that something to watch for, like what we saw over here, right? It's all contingent on closing above 108.250 and preferably above the 109.360 level, right? That would look fine. And even if it can push up further, look to 116 if we start to see a rally over the weekend and on Sunday before the close. Otherwise, it's all about the close open currently being held on a close open specifically, and then seeing if we get a nice move above 114 to actually close the structural low here with a higher low close, lower low swing, thus giving a big danger sign to the bull, big danger sign to the bears if the bulls start to recover higher and start to push the high side structural zones. Now let's go ahead and look at that daily, which means that we're going to get rid of what I'm talking about here, but you can see that 1272 poke on the daily, just perfect, huh? Love it. Love how clean Bitcoin price action is. If you don't love it, then maybe you just don't enjoy charts as much as I do. And yes, I'm a nerd. You can say it. It's okay. But let's go ahead to the weekly support and resistance zones of interest, right? Remember, this poked right at a weekly at 114, right? So that's going to still be relevant. But for the daily, this was a common area of resistance overhead. So we got the 112 weekly. We need to see Bitcoin starting to get above there, start working its way to the 113.5 up here, right? So we have this lower high. We saw rejections the whole way through. Once it was let through, went to the 114 level and then 116 to 118 before coming back to the weekly 109 to 112. Well, same thing here. We saw that each time this area acted as kind of an inflection point or a pivot point at 113.5. Even on the way down, bounce up, get above it. And the next day, after testing it, came down to the dailies here and then bounced up into our 116, 118 level. Right, came back down, swept both weeklies, even got a close open deviation after hitting the 1272 fib, bounce up. We have not seen a daily close above 112. We need to see 112 to 113.5. 112 close will give us the bias that if we haven't tested 113.5 again, we will, and likely head up to test 114 and then above to where we have another big swing just below 115. And realistically above there, we're looking right back to the main area of overhead resistance at 116 to 118, right? To the downside, like I said, 109, 360 preferred, but 109 bare minimum. Otherwise, it's going to start running the low side structure here on the daily and where the weekly kind of, held up, coming into Sunday's close, which is this candle right here was the daily on Sunday at that 108,676. Right, need to hold that. So you really, if 109's dropped, it's going to look nasty coming into the close on Sunday. So just keep a close eye on it. If it can maintain that setup through the weekend, we might be in for some fun. But the bulls still have a ton of work to do. They're in the bearish half of the bands. Swings down can still happen even if the close open high or low, or the close open maintains around that 108.6 level. So just keep a close eye on it over the weekend. We do have a trend. We have a shift in momentum, rather. We have a cool down in volatility. You see the bands starting to curl around on each other. That does mean that as we go from the expansion into compression, basis band, watch it just above 112. But if it gets above, fair game up to that overhead resistance, 116 to 118 by that upper first. And kind of go from there. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. And, of course, as I always say, stay safe. With all that being said, I'll talk to you again on Monday. And, out. Take care.